Yeah, in that particular case, there were so many dynamics. We were in our first 2 years of lead pastoring, which we'd never done before. I was drowning, but I'm not a personality that would admit it or even be aware of it. So I look back on that and say, oh man, I was drowning. But at the time, I probably would have said, oh, this is going great. That's kind of part of my problem. And so then I had the full scope of the church. We, quite frankly, we came into the church after we took the job, discovering it was in dire financial straits, which we were not aware of when we interviewed. And then Lisa's advocating for one ministry, which is what the women's ministry leader should be doing. And now she and I have these hats on. So we have the lover hat, we have the raising the kids hat, all those different hats. But then we have the lead pastor and women's ministry hat. And that's where things got sideways, is which hat is primary and which one affects the other.
Welcome to the Glass House. This episode is long anticipated. Lynley, we have the amazing Steve and Lisa Cuss with us today.
That's right.
All the way from Denver, Colorado, one of our favorite places on the planet. Welcome to the show, guys.
Oh, it's good to be with you guys.
Yeah, good to be with you guys.
You were just here in town for Women's Forum. You got to tour colleges. You were getting to know the Nashville scene. What do you think about this city?
So, you know what's funny is Lisa and I met in Knoxville. That's where we both went to college.
Oh, that's right.
We have a really soft spot for Tennessee. And when I first moved to America, the only family I knew in the world in America lived in Nashville.
Oh,
so
wow.
I would Greyhound over frequently when I was homesick. So we love Nashville.
That's
We got
awesome.
some good friends there.
Oh my gosh. And we pulled in. There's something about Nashville, and it's probably the people we know as well. It just feels alive and warm and welcoming and both big and small
Yeah,
at the same time.
that's a good
So
way to describe it. Yeah,
we
big
loved
and
it.
small.
Yeah, we're big fans.
That's
yeah.
awesome. Well,
Wait a minute. I'm still stuck on the Greyhound.
the Greyhound, yeah. Anything you want to say about your Greyhound experience, Steve?
Or just how old you are.
Oh, at the time, I mean, the last time I Greyhound Lynley was like 2 years ago.
Oh.
Yeah,
Can you
it's
still do it?
It's a fascinating cultural experience
I'll
to
bet.
Greyhound.
Okay. Well,
Wow.
You do it for the experience mostly.
Yeah.
You do it because it's a very American experience and it's wild.
next time we go out.
It's a wild experience.
Who knew
Okay.
it was still going? Wow.
All right.
Greyhound. Let's do it.
Next trip.
Well, Steve and Lisa, we know you very well, but tell our guests a little bit about you. Each of you, introduce yourselves and a little bit of your background.
Yeah, okay. So I've been a pastor forever, like 28 years. And 2 years ago, I stepped down from being the lead pastor of our church. And now we're congregants at our church. And I now travel around the world mostly helping organizations and teams lower anxiety in the workplace. So my short story is I was trained in a theory that teaches you to notice anxiety in any space you walk into. And it teaches you to particularly notice your own anxiety, which a lot of leaders don't know they have. So I wrote a book on that, and then I wrote another book after that. And now I mostly consult and help leaders and humans be well. That's how I would say it.
Very
Simply.
nicely said.
Yeah. And then while Steve has been lead pastor, I've been pastor's wife, volunteer work at our church. So did a lot with women's ministry, with worship ministry, with children's. I was a teacher originally and then went back to school in 2014. A lot of it because of our experience in pastoring, to get my master's degree in clinical mental health counseling. So that for me has just been a huge journey of growth and facing some big stuff, but also freedom. So I own my own private practice and I do a lot of trauma work. And then I do soul care intensives with individuals that want to take a deep dive where you look at both faith and trauma processing together.
Well, when we were making a list of all the core emotions that we're going through this season, and we came on the one, anger. I don't know if this is a compliment. We just thought we need
Man,
Steve and Lisa to talk about anger.
Who would be better?
These are the two of the angriest people we know. No,
That's right.
We really want to dive into this topic because we think it's something very relevant to most people in ministry, and that is, how do you handle anger?
Well, honestly, we picked you guys because we wanted somebody who has experience, like the actual school experience that could talk about like what it is from, I don't even know what the right word to say is, but sometimes pastors give advice, but we really haven't been trained to give the correct advice. And we were like, we know you two have been trained. You can talk about it a little more from that perspective.
Well, let me just say this. I want to set you guys free to
That
talk.
was a lot of words.
You're right. In the church, if it's ever talked about, it's almost always the pastor says, don't let the sun go down in your anger.
Yes.
So that's like the most common thing people hear is if I'm angry, there's something wrong with me. I need to fix it before I go to bed tonight, which isn't always the best way to think about how to process your anger. So you guys talk a little bit about anger and how you see ministry leaders particularly experiencing it.
Wow. Yeah, I see anger as something that I think people are either overly comfortable with or extremely afraid of.
Yeah.
And when it's not named that way, then when it's experienced together on a church staff and then you throw the God card in, there's all these assumptions about what's going on and what it means that makes it really hard. And then if you throw in the difference of power dynamics within a church staff, depending on who is showing the anger, who's receiving it, it just makes it a really complicated mess to enter into. And we tend to spiritualize it instead of calling it what it is.
Really good.
I'm definitely in that second category of being afraid of it. So it took me, I think, a long time to realize I was raised by a very angry dad. So anger to me, I couldn't have named this for a while, but anger means like massive destruction to me when I think of anger. So therefore, I'm afraid of my own. I'm afraid of others people's anger. And then what you were just saying, Lisa, about power dynamics, I was really shocked when I would sit down with a congregant who was critical or a staff member that I needed to talk to about their behavior. And I'd be very calm. I'd be chatting like this, and they would feel like I was angry. Not all the time. I'm not saying that every time I met, but somebody would say, man, Steve was yelling at me. I'm like, what is going on? And it was that power dynamic. Like I'm being calm and reasonable and thoughtful and listening, but every word I say, because of my role, they hear as like rebuke. That was, and still is, I think, a hard dynamic.
Well, I said this in an email to you guys, but anger is often referred to as the most important emotion because it's the warning light for all the others. It's the one where we have to stop and ask ourselves the question, what's really going on inside me? Mm-hmm. And part of Lynley and I's story, which started the Glass House, was when you have Sunday coming every Sunday and you have to be seen publicly together and church members are always monitoring the vibe between the pastor and the wife. There were a lot of things that were making me angry those years, were making her angry those years, but we never had the courage to address them because it just felt too radioactive.
Yeah.
I would assess that differently.
Okay. How would you describe it?
Well, I loved what you said, Lisa, as far as some people are too comfortable with it and some people are not comfortable enough.
Okay.
Because I actually think I'm too comfortable with it. Sometimes, like, it's okay. Like, let's just talk about this. And I don't assess where he is at that moment, and I'll just come at him and he's maybe had a bad day or something like that and he's not comfortable with it. So I think that was our bigger problem is that I loved what you said there. And I'm curious about that. We can come back to this question, but if you find very many people that are in the middle, in the sweet spot of anger, or if it's mostly people who are overly comfortable or not comfortable at all.
Good question.
But sorry, I didn't mean to hijack your other
Let's go
question.
there.
I love that you just brought that out and even can talk about it as far as it relates to the two of you. I think for us too, I mean, I think one of the most important things to look at is what is our relationship with anger? How do we feel about it and what did we experience with it even growing up? So I grew up in the Midwest area and I will say, I think in all of the cultural contexts, I experienced anger, made my own meaning from it with my own wiring, and felt like anger is something that maybe you can experience when you're older, but as a child, felt like I didn't know what to do with it. Like it wasn't okay to maybe misbehave with anger. I didn't know how to express it. And so I ended up taking anger and it would go more toward myself more than other people because it's got to go somewhere. And if it's not going to go out, it typically will go inward. And so it's interesting then as you come into relationship and I would say my relationship with anger has been very negative because of what I think it means. And if I were to see Steve be anger, then it means that disconnection, possible abandonment is coming. And that feels really threatening, even though that's not what it means. That's what I perceive in the moment.
Yeah.
So my own relationship with it is the main emotion that I would try to stuff because I don't know what to do with it and still be okay and feel connected. What would you say for you?
Oh, I wouldn't worry about it. Yeah, I would just say that's probably fine. I don't know what to say. Yeah, so even this morning with our flights getting home, we had massive complications, and we between us had to get on the phone with all the people involved. And I struggle to manage my anger if somebody doesn't take responsibility.
Yeah.
So it is helpful to know your triggers. Or if I feel like, I think my anger is often triggered if I get the impression someone thinks I'm stupid and they can put one over me, I find myself getting really big, like, oh, you're not going to trick me. And I totally lose connection. So it definitely helps to know your triggers. I guess I'm always surprised that I don't seem to have much control over it. Once it floods, it's kind of, I'm off in its grip, but I'm definitely not comfortable with it. Like I'm a middle-aged man and I'm still pretty afraid of anger.
Yeah. I love the question, what is your relationship to anger?
Yeah.
That's
and
really
I
healthy.
think even hearing Lynley, it sounds like you are comfortable with anger and that it's almost like a form of connection that I'm wondering if it shows passion and that if somebody will meet you in it, then it shows that they care and want so much to connect with you that they can meet you there.
This is the problem with having a therapist on the interview,
Yeah.
guys.
It's
That's
definitely passion. It's never unhealthy.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And if you just keep saying that,
I'll just keep believing it. No, I'm kidding.
I would say in a very complimentary way, I think when Lynley and I begin to drift, it's normally your passion for our relationship, which comes in the form of anger, that forces me to have to recognize the distance.
Yeah.
You are more comfortable initiating through anger. And I'm not saying angry in like a mean-spirited way, but like you'll pound your fist on the table if that's what it takes to say, hey, we're not connecting. And that's, not unlike what Jesus did in terms of turning over the money tables when the purity of the temple was compromised. There's something really important at stake here, and if I have to raise my voice to call attention to it, I will. My problem with that is, like, this is a masculinity issue, I think, but if she initiates it, then I feel like I'm a poor leader for not having been the one to bring it up, so now I'm in shame.
Oh,
And so I'm feeling like, oh, man, here we go again. She's angry. I probably should have been angry first if I really care about the marriage, but she's leading me, so here we go. So that's been a challenge for us, I think.
Yeah.
It's that you feel like you're constantly the one pulling me back in. But my relationship to anger is very different. I have two parents that have both gone through severe depression. And
Andrew grew up in the Midwest. Maybe
and
it's
I grew
a
up in
Midwest
the
thing.
Midwest, Northwest Illinois. And I really was surprised to learn that when anger is not cared for, it becomes depression. And that's really been true in my life. When I'm really mad about something and it's chronic and it's not getting fixed, I tend to just become kind of settled in hopelessness. Rather than getting bigger, I get smaller, like you said, Steve, and just kind of lick my wounds and say, well, this is just life on planet Earth, rather than trying to do something about it.
Yeah.
And I think ministry leaders can vacillate there. I've seen pastors who rise up when they are being attacked. I've seen pastors who kind of withdraw and question whether they should even be in ministry in the first place.
Yeah.
It's just a matter, I think, of how you grew up with anger.
Yeah, I think that's really tender. And I can relate to that. I think at the end of the day, I do a lot of parts work. So looking at anger is a part, could show up as a part of us, and oftentimes is a very protective part. Like if you look at the difference between anger and rage, anger usually is shown to protect ourselves. We can get armored up, or it's to protect a cause or somebody else. Whereas rage is really born to go against and move against somebody else or a cause. But anger in itself is protective. And oftentimes, I mean, if I look at myself in childhood and if my anger is going toward myself because I'm not sure what it's going to be like if I let it out towards other people and disconnect, then it's actually, in my younger years, it served me really, really well. But now in my adult years, if I take that same protective stance, it actually keeps me disconnected from Steve or from people around me because I don't show up as who I really am. And I think it's interesting that the longings, like you were talking about, what are the longings? The longings are to connect, like to be okay, to be able to feel seen for who you are, and to not feel trapped, to feel like there's agency in something we can do. And I think sometimes we feel stuck and it can go into depression when there's some kind of a cause or some kind of longing that's not being met and we feel like there's nothing we can do.
Steve, last week at the Women's Forum, you talked about in 2016, you finally stood up to your inner critic. I was curious, what made you angry enough to deal with that?
Oh, one of the things I've been trained in is to notice predictable recurring patterns, either in my own life and behavior or in church leadership. Just think about any pattern, like a simple thing in church leadership, in an elders meeting. Which elder uses the most words? Which elder never speaks up unless they're called upon? Like, these are patterns that elders form. And then I also form those patterns in my life. And so I feel like the gift of this training, it makes me intolerant of my stuck patterns. And that's what happened in 2016. I'm like, here we go again. I know this guy, and when am I actually going to take the time to deal with him instead of let him have so much free reign in my life? That was the turning point for me, was that 2016 voice of condemnation was, I don't know, Ben, like the 7,000th time or something, And I think what happens in your stuck patterns is you're like, I'll get to it. Or some people in their stuck patterns, they just feel like it's inevitable. Like, well, this is just the way it is.
Yeah.
I really feel like I've been given the gift with this training I was given, that I don't have to tolerate it. So for me, it was like, okay, now's the time to tackle it. I happened to be on sabbatical when that incident happened. That helped. I was kind of at the end of a profound journey with God. I was right at the end of my sabbatical, and I was actually dreading going back to ministry. You mentioned a depression. I very rarely, if ever, struggle with depression, but I found myself going into like a black hole as I pictured getting back into church leadership.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, that's not good. So that was part of it for me, just wanting, I guess another, as I stack my answers here, I'm always trying to measure, like, okay, what is the gospel promise? And am I experiencing that in my body? Like, the gospel promise is freedom, peace, and love. And I think part of it as well was like, well, I'm not experiencing that, so something's wrong with the way I'm receiving the gospel. So it was kind of a combination of that sent me on that journey.
Was there you're talking about recurring pattern, was there a recurring thing that you two would get angry about within the ministry context, like between pastor and pastor's wife? And did you learn how to come at it in a healthy way?
Like anger that became an issue between the two of us?
Yes. Like if maybe, Lisa, if you felt left out of something, or if you felt like you couldn't say to Steve, my discernment makes me feel like you're not doing this right. But like, that's hard to say to your husband. So I didn't know if there was any sort of pattern that you guys dealt with. So for our listeners who are typically pastors and wives, that they could maybe relate to.
Yeah.
I think so many. Like I'm a somewhat off the cuff preacher, so I prepare a lot, 15 hours of prep, but then I try to preach more off the cuff. I've got my manuscript, but I think I'm best. And therefore I say things that I don't mean sometimes, or I overstate something, which might then put Lisa in a tough position in the lobby, particularly if she disagrees with what her husband said from the pulpit, and then has to sit through in the lobby people grumbling to her. Like, she agrees with them, but she can't really throw me under the bus. That she's just in a really tough spot. That would be one that comes to mind.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think there's multiple examples.
I mean, that doesn't have to be that many examples, because most of them are coming from me, I think. But anyway, please continue.
This will be an extended show. Just letting you all know.
multiple examples. There's legion.
Steve and Lisa going through counseling with you guys.
We'll send you an invoice.
I will say on my part, what I've learned through the years is that I care too much about what other people think and how people are going to take things. So if you take that stance with somebody who is going to be preaching off the cuff, and then that has caused some tension between the two of us and some anger at how I am perceiving that people could have possibly taken things that he said. And being frustrated. And Steve's like, it was just off the cuff, I didn't mean, and people can handle themselves, which is true. Like we've had to come in the middle with a lot of that. I would say one of the biggest wins was back in the earlier days when I was co-leading with women's ministry. And we had a very limited budget. We were trying to get vision underway. And, what we saw for women's ministry didn't fit within the scope and the budget and some other things for the church at large. And for being vulnerable, it kept coming back in our bedroom again and again and again. And it felt like, gosh, we can't see each other in this. And we wrestled with that for a while. And then right or wrong, what I ended up trying to decide for myself is like, what is my highest value here? Because it kept coming back. And at that point, I put more value on us being able to be together and what we were doing in our marriage and in leadership that way than in women's ministry when I knew other people could lead. So I, over time, stepped out of that role, right or wrong, just because I cared more about what was going on between us.
Yeah, in that particular case, there were so many dynamics. We were in our first 2 years of lead pastoring, which we'd never done before. I was drowning, but I'm not a personality that would admit it or even be aware of it. So I look back on that and say, oh man, I was drowning. But at the time, I probably would have said, oh, this is going great. That's kind of part of my problem. And so then I had the full scope of the church. Quite frankly, we came into the church after we took the job discovering it was in dire financial straits, which we were not aware of when we interviewed. And then Lisa's advocating for one ministry, which is what the women's ministry leader should be doing. And now she and I have these hats on. So we have the lover hat, we have the raising the kids hat, all those different hats. But then we have the lead pastor and women's ministry hat. And that's where things got sideways, is which hat is primary and which one affects the other. And not just with Lisa, but I have frequently not felt angry, I think, but hurt when people don't appreciate how hard the scope of it all is and they have their advocacy for their one thing, which is tricky because that's what they should do. But that sometimes happened as well, where I'm kind of like, man, this whole big picture is daunting. And you've got this one slice, which is very important. Anyway, there was a lot of dynamic in that one. And we had young kids. It was all magnified by that.
And we've, over time, just had to really look at what are our highest values. And even when like one is going to be real close to the other, which one is going to come over all of the others. And that changes throughout marriage. But that's been a helpful tool when we look at which hats do we want to take off and which ones we want to wear.
Yeah.
I know there's a couple listening here that is happening in their house. I mean, probably a young pastor. He's maybe not watching. I mean, there were times when I'd walked into the church and people were like, whoa, that was a story about you. And, of course, there was 3 messages and I got there to the end and I'm like, oh, I have no idea what you're talking about. So if you were sitting down with a young couple and they're struggling with that in their marriage, how now, in maturity, would you say to them, here's what you could say maybe, or here's how the husband could respond? Is there just something to say of, that hurt me, that caused me to be angry, like a healthy way to address that?
It's a really good question. I do. There's so many dynamics in this because Lisa and I are both people pleasers, but I think it's accurate. If you think this as well, I think I will make the difficult call quicker than Lisa will, that she would want to put that difficult call off if it means relational disharmony, particularly as it relates to maybe having a difficult conversation with a staff member who's misbehaving. Like we are both prone to let it go on too long, but I think I'm shorter to say, okay, enough, we need to deal with it. And Lisa will primarily look at, oh no, the relational health is broken. I don't know how to grow out of that quickly.
Okay.
Like for us, it's been a long, slow journey of maturity. And I'm always hesitant to tell a young couple to mature faster. I think we talked about it a lot. I think as a preacher, I could have done a better job of being more disciplined. I think in my journey of learning to preach every week, I could have been more careful about off-the-cuff things. It was hard. It was really hard to do. It's not a very particular answer, but
That's
well,
okay.
I mean, and it's one of those that can't be solved right away, but it is something that I think I would say to a couple, and we would together, man, can we get to a place where we can talk about this, talk about our assumptions that are going on behind it, and in that, I think get to a place of curiosity with what's going on. We find that anytime we can, so for me, I have that soldiered up part that cares so much about what people are going to think or how people are going to take things within a relationship. I find that I have to name that's a part of me. And when that gets in the driver's seat of my life, I can't see anything else. And so then it's hard for me to see where Steve was coming from. And so I think a question would be, in this, when a couple feels like extreme differences, what is it that they're trying to protect? Like what is it that is hard to let go of? Because usually they're both trying to protect different things.
yeah.
And then we would just, we would bring humor in and also normalize it. I think there are probably multiple couples that can relate on either side of this. And it is normal. And it's a part of being human. And it's part of figuring out how we do relationship and what our relationship is to anger and to leadership and all the things. And just to know it's normal can even help us not be so rigid,
Yeah, a lot of our advice to younger pastors and spouses is that it's a 5 to 7 year journey to feel like the role is you've got your shoulders under it. So even like our lead pastor that we handed over to, he was a Young Life guy, incredibly gifted and talented. He'd never been a lead pastor before. And we've just tried to tell he and his wife, this is 5 to 7 years. There's no rush. You should give yourself a lot of permission for your mistakes and your rough edges because we just don't know how to turbocharge that. The other thing that's interesting, I'm happy to talk about, like it doesn't bother me to talk about anger, mistakes we've made. I just would not want it to also be out of balance that my testimony would be I felt overwhelmingly supported by Lisa and my congregation. Like we're analyzing a particular part of this, but in the big picture, I think if you feel like your spouse is each other's cheerleader, a lot of this stuff gets worked out.
Yeah. I
That's
love
good.
one thing you said earlier, Lisa.
Just one.
Well, just one.
Sorry.
Of all this, there's one. I got one takeaway. No, I love when you said anger has to go somewhere. That took me a long time to figure that out. That you can choose to hold your anger in, but eventually it's gonna go somewhere. And when you said that it tends to go inward with you, what does that look like? Does that look like just a lot of self-condemnation? Does it look like depression? Like, what does it look like for you when you're going inward?
Yeah, so I don't know if you all have heard of the anger iceberg, but it's the whole idea that if we look at an iceberg of emotions and the little tip of that huge block of ice that we see out of the water is typically anger, especially when we're looking at reactivity. But if you would go down deep underneath it, you would see things like disappointment, embarrassment, unhealthy guilt, as opposed to just guilt, shame, fear of abandonment, fear of rejection. You would see all of these deeper things that are at work, and they are covered up by anger. And that can typically go then towards somebody else or toward a cause, or it can go toward the self.
Yeah.
So I think your original question was, how do I experience toward myself? It would be, for me, oh my gosh, what is mine to own in this? And really perseverate on that quite a bit out of balance. And it would look like an inner critic. telling me, looking at the gap between who I am and who I think I should be, and trying to do all the shoulds and nots to get there
Good.
as well.
Okay, I always like to end with a game. It's an easy game. There's going to be 2 different rounds of this game, okay? First of all, everybody has to share one really small thing that makes you really big in anger. I'll go first. When people come up to me after I have just preached and say something that has absolutely nothing to do with what I just preached, it just makes me angry every time. Like, especially as the president of Lifeway, I get someone always walks up with a book that they want me to publish, and it feels so out of place because we just had this amazing worship experience, and now you're bringing me your book, and I just want to say, did you hear anything that we just talked about before you hand me your book? I don't know why. I always feel I feel a little used when that happens. It makes me really. It happened yesterday, and you got to hear about it on the way home.
I enjoyed that.
All right, you got one?
Gosh, I have so many, but yes, I can start with one. When I'm riding in the passenger seat and the driver, who may or may not be named Ben, has the GPS on the 12-inch screen in front of us, and then is like, "Was that my turn?"
Yes. I feel like every time Steve's around, we talk about
I know,
my driving.
I wasn't meaning it like that, but I'm like, okay, well, why don't we just guess where we're going to go if the screen in front of us is not telling us where to go?
I'm insufferable with that.
It's okay.
I understand.
I've actually gotten better, but that is one thing.
It's not just me, though. When you ride with other people who are bad drivers.
No, I don't say anything to anybody else. I can control myself.
No, but you're still angry.
But I can control it. I just can't control it with you.
Very good.
I
Okay.
think this is, in fact, the third Mandrell conversation I've had about your driving.
Yeah,
It's
really,
a recurring theme.
That actually, I'll come up with something better.
All right,
Oh,
go
no,
ahead.
no, yeah.
Steve, you got one?
My quickest trigger would be discourtesy. People trying to jump the line in some kind of situation. And then lately I've been noticing in online customer service situations, I mean, this is fresh from this morning, people using the cut and paste answer that the upper management told them,
Yeah.
where that poor person who's helping me has been given no authority to solve my problem.
Yeah.
But instead of just saying, I have no authority to solve your problem, they cut and paste, oh, I'm sorry for the inconvenience. These kinds of I just feel like you're not seeing me. I think that gets me. I have to manage my irritation and realize this poor employee is doing the best with what they've been given. My frustration is really with their boss's boss.
Yeah.
That would be one for me.
That's good.
Mine I learned in my 20s is any insinuation from somebody else that I am selfish.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and I know I am, but I think when I just, growing up in the Midwest, I think to be selfish is probably worse than anything else.
Okay.
And so, yeah.
So long as you're a scalpless serial killer.
That's right. Yeah, then we get really big. I've actually put somebody in a headlock before. Over them, and so I've gotten really big.
That's good. Wow, I'd like to see that.
On my job interview for a church.
Yeah.
Very nice.
much.
That's amazing.
Good. All right, did you want another one, or we can go to the next round?
Go to the next round.
Okay.
Let me keep thinking.
The next game is, what is one thing that you have found that's helpful in processing anger?
For me, the biggest gift for me, like Lisa has helped me learn to have permission to have my own emotions. So that's been a huge gift. Giving myself permission to be a human being, because my anger is usually, the iceberg for me is usually some kind of hurt or feeling of insecurity. So when I think about criticism that you get when you're a lead pastor, my first 5 years, I really took it all personally and it really hurt. My second 5 years, I was so mad at myself for taking it personally, and I just kept saying to myself, come on, you should be over it by now. My final 6 years was my healthiest when I said, well, the reason criticism is hurting me is because criticism is hurtful. These people are actually being very hurtful. I'm not talking about your average person with an opinion.
Yeah.
Those people I'm fine with, even if their opinion has a little heat on it. The average person in the church that wants to share their critical opinion, I'm actually quite good with. It's those kind of usual suspect critics that just really get their kicks out of kicking me around. They do a lot of damage. And it took me till my final run in lead pastoring to give myself permission to be heard. And that was much healthier. So I found giving myself permission, which means that healing inefficiently was the gift, trying not to heal so quickly.
That's good. I like
Long
that.
answer, but that'd be mine.
I usually have to give myself permission to pause and get out of my spinning feelings and gut sensation, because I experience a lot in my body, to where I can just be curious, okay, what's behind that? And it helps me then to go cognitive and to say, okay, in this situation, what do I know? What is unknown? What assumptions am I making, whether that's about myself or about somebody else or about the situation that really may not be true? And then what do I want to really be curious about? Because if I can come to a place of curiosity, then I'm more motivated to do something rather than to stay spinning.
There you
So
go.
mine's going to sound way more simple, but I need to go outside. If I'm really, really mad, I need to go for a walk. I need to wait 24 hours to respond, because my immediate reaction to anything is very explosive or reactionary. And I've had to learn that about myself. Ben's had to keep reminding me a little bit, like, just think on it. He'll say it nicely, like, why don't we think on this a little bit before you respond? So if I go for a walk, get some fresh air, clear my mind. I wish it was deeper than that, but that's pretty much it.
You're very disciplined about exercise too. I think it helps you tremendously.
Oh, I mean, I almost have to. He thinks that I enjoy the gym, but I just have to go to, because my personality, I've learned, like, I can just
Detox.
so I just go and kind of blow off steam.
One of the things I love to do is I love to sit down when I'm angry and fill up a piece of paper with my raw feelings that I plan to throw away. I don't want anybody to read this, but it's how I really feel right now. And it's not the pastor side of me. It's just the human side of me. And it may have words in there that I wouldn't want anybody to read. But I've got to put them on paper so I can deal with them.
Yeah.
And most of my inspiration from even my public speaking, preaching is from writers. So I've done a lot of research on writers. And one of the dominant themes of why people write is that it helps them to make sense of their lives.
Right.
It's the actual writing out of something that makes it clear in their own head. It's not like it was clear, now I'm going to write it. No, I'm writing it, now it's clear. And I've learned that about me. In fact, one of the hardest things for me being president of Lifeway is that I'm not in a regular writing rhythm because I don't preach every Sunday. And so my head has not been as clear the last 5 years as it normally is because I'm in that discipline of having to write a lot. So I've found writing is really helpful for me. So I think the thing that we hope you take away from this episode is that anger does go somewhere. You do have to deal with it, and you have to find healthy ways to process it. Any final words you guys would want to add to anybody out there?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we could talk for hours on anger, but there's a side of it we haven't covered that I do think is essential. There are 2 or 3 occasions in my life where somebody has given me the gift of their outrage. And it's usually based around a genuine injustice. My first experience of it was as a chaplain when one of my fellow chaplains had a miscarriage in her younger years. And the way I, as a young, ignorant man, talked about miscarriage in our peer group triggered her into a outrage response at me. She was red hot, furious at me, swore at me, actually. And you know, I think in everything we've talked about, that reaction could sound like, oh, that was inappropriate. But actually, she kind of gave me the gift of showing me I am mishandling something very, very precious in the way. I was 24, you know, I was a young white guy, ignorant. She was deeply wounded, of course, by this miscarriage that for her had happened 20 years ago. And I don't know if that makes sense in this
Yeah, it
context.
makes total sense.
I've had 2 or 3 times in my life where I've said something or done something and somebody has responded in outrage. And because it was a justice issue, I feel like that was a gift. Their anger was a gift to me. It forced me to look in the mirror. That'd be something we haven't covered yet that I think is important.
Were you able to receive it from her?
Yeah, it was. I mean, we were both crying. Oh. I'll share this and you guys can edit it or not. I come from a Christian tradition where babies should never be baptized. And this is like a make or break in my tradition. And then I discovered as a hospital chaplain that they actually do a ceremonial kind of sprinkling of a dead baby if a baby's been stillborn. And I had to do that. I mean, in my theology, it's so grave. I would not have taken the job if I'd known that was part of the job. So I take the job, I discover a few weeks in, oh no, like chaplains, part of our job is to do this ceremonial sprinkling. And so what we would do in our chaplaincy is we would debrief every morning the day before, and I had to do a ceremonial sprinkling at 2 a.m. that night. And I was mortified by it. I didn't treat the family well because I was so wrapped up in that was the age when I was more wrapped up in my theology than caring for people.
Yeah.
So I was just sharing this, just like, oh, poor me. That's how I was sharing it with my chaplain group. Oh, how hard's my life? Like I had to do this terrible thing. And Allison, she was sitting right next to me in our peer group. We're in a circle, and she just unloaded on me about how insensitive I was. And she shared what it was like for her to have a miscarriage as if it happened yesterday. And yes, in the moment, I must have been far along in my chaplaincy to realize that this whole experience was a gift. Because in my early chaplaincy, I was very defensive about this kind of feedback. But in the moment, I could realize, oh my, I have stomped on holy ground.
Yeah.
I have misread. And if I can listen to what she's trying to say to me, there's learning for me in that. And it was a life-changing moment for me.
That's a very important part of anger that we do have to pay attention to, is that sometimes the explosions are for our own good.
Yeah.
And sometimes things have to get worse before they get better.
Yeah.
And anger can push us to grow in areas that we wouldn't have done before. Thanks for sharing that, Steve. That's very personal. I appreciate you being honest about that.
Yeah. This is really simple, I think, and anyone can notice this. Anxiety tends to exaggerate. And I think we can, as pastors, always put ourselves in the victim chair because it is a tough job and people come at us. So we are prone when we get together to share war stories. I would encourage pastors to be very careful about the way their brain exaggerates. A simple example would be back in the COVID days. I heard so many pastors say, no matter what I do, half the church is angry. I heard that dozens of times. That's
true.
not true. That is not true. It's not true that 50% of your congregation is angry. What's true is probably 30 to 70% are fine. What's actually true is more than the usual amount are angry, but it's not half the church.
Yeah.
No matter what I do, half the church will be mad. So I would just encourage pastors to be very careful about the way your wounds change your narrative, because then you can end up looking at your congregation falsely through the lens of a coping narrative. That would be one thing I would.
That's good.
That's helpful.
Portion. Yeah.
And I think it comes back to what we talked about in the beginning. I don't think staff cultures talk enough about their relationship with anger. Alongside that, relationship with joy. Sometimes, like when we look at all of the emotions, we would have a relationship with them. But specifically with anger, to come back, just to normalize that so that we can get to know how each other responds to it. And that also helps, with the famous line of, people do so much their anger through texting nowadays too. But how often people will say, man, they were just yelling at me, when the person either who was physically there talking felt like they weren't, but body language communicated yelling, or on text, people read it through the lens of that it's a great conversation to talk about in a culture of what do you notice most in anger? I notice body language and facial expressions the most in anger. And then I notice tone before I even hear the words that were spoken. And so that's what's going to speak so loud to me. Other people are going to notice the words spoken before anything else. And it's great information for us to be curious about when we're not angry, so that we can attune to it or address it when things happen where people are blowing up.
That is so good. What a great staff meeting that would be if it was led in a healthy way to say, let's talk about how we're going to deal with our anger, because it's going to show up in here. And it would be really helpful to probably understand people's previous relationship with anger and their expectations of how they're going to experience it in a Christian environment. Steve, you and I just had a conversation recently about this at an event, and I think women appreciated it, that Oftentimes when anger shows up, when a woman brings it into a room, particularly if it's a room full of men, we've had women here at Lifeway tell me that they're very uncomfortable being emotionally expressive in a meeting with men because they'll be viewed as unstable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So say again what you said when we were together, because I would love for this audience to hear that.
Yeah, I think we said two things, and I'm also enjoying the irony of you and I, two dudes, talking about this in front of our ladies.
Yeah.
Like, this is very perilous right now.
They're like, where's this going?
But I think we were trying to say that the imperative is actually on the men to manage their need to speak to a woman when there was a lot we said, Ben. Like, we said the idea that men aren't emotional is absurd, first of all. But I think for some of the women, they get tired of their emotions being managed by men. So the idea of a man to let someone, not just a woman, but let somebody bring whatever they're bringing and not feel the need to manage or contain it was one thing.
You talked about how exhausting it is to be the only one of your kind, and that contributes to the anxiety.
Very much. If you're the only woman in a room of men, that's exhausting for that woman. But again, that's where our ladies could share when they've had that situation for them. And also, like, if you're a double minority, if you're the only black woman in the room with white men, even harder, for sure. So the imperative is on the leader to help everyone be human-sized. But while I've got the mic, I'll just say the best thing we did at our church is 50% of our staff meetings were these conversations, and 50% were the vision and mission of the church.
That's good.
And when I encourage organizations to do that, I get a lot of resistance. Oh, we're so busy. We don't have time to add. And I just keep trying to tell them, your management load and your team health will go through the roof if you spend 20%, 30, 50% of your staff time in under the surface development, relational health, people having the freedom to have these conversations we just had now. You'll get so much further long term.
Agree totally. We probably better give the ladies opportunity to respond to any of that.
Lisa, go ahead.
Well, I was curious to hear from you too. I think my response to that is it depends on how safe I feel with the men in the room, how much they know me or even their position. If I don't feel as well known or as safe to be vulnerable or wonder about judgment, then I armor up and I will be less authentic and less vulnerable. And just hold, as I can be really good at doing, hold all the things until I'm out of the conversation. Because I don't want to be seen as incredibly emotional or unstable, which is true. I think that a lot of women have been accused of that when it's really not true.
I mean, I can't say it much better than you did just then. I would say my personality, I also protect myself because I think a bold woman is not seen as bold. A bold man who, speaks up for the truth in a meeting is, so strong and courageous, and the female is not seen in a word that I could say here. And so I tend to self-protect in that way. Is like, well, because I'm not, but if I am strong opinionated in this meeting where I'm the only female, it's going to come across like, whoa, man, like Ben's got to deal with a lot with her, kind of thing. Like, that's what I think they're going to be thinking. So I don't say anything because it feels scary to me.
I've been in some consulting meetings lately, a few in a row, where there were like 6 or 8 men and 2 women in the room. And we'd be in a circle and watching the women almost snuggling up together on the couch and they're co-regulating, as one of them talks, she will then look at the other like,
are we representing each other?
Are we
give me some
but
feedback.
Also like literally physically touching shoulders, and they're co-regulating to try to stay human-sized. And when I pointed that out to the men, they were like, how do you know this secret language? And the only way I know is by listening. Like, all you have to do is ask, what's your experience like when you walk into a room? But of course, that presumes that you're safe enough for them to tell the truth, which after some patterns of behavior, you may not be. So in these particular consulting situations, I was trying to create a safe enough culture for these women to share with these men. This is what it's like to be us.
Yeah, that's great.
Because I think the imperative nowadays is on the people in power. Whoever has the power in the room, they are the ones with the obligation to help everyone stay human-sized. And it's not complicated. It's not hard to do.
That's good. That's really good stuff. Okay, well, I think that's a wrap. We're about out of time. So, Steve and Lisa, thank you for making this happen on a day after you had to fly all the way home.
Our pleasure, yeah.
It's good to be able to chat with you guys. I learned from doing these.
The Glass House is executive produced by Angie Elkins, edited and engineered by Donnie Gordon with help from Nathan Howard, show notes and production help from Nikki Ogden, photography by Emily Bergeron and Bailey Watley. Recorded at the Lifeway Podcast Studio in Brentwood, Tennessee.